Hi, nice to see you all. So we'll get started in a few minutes. I think we'll be getting started now. Hi,
Hi,
there we go. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm just sort of trying to figure out the Instagram live. So this is the first time I'm doing it.
Okay, you good? Do you need any assistance? I think we're good.
I'm
I
good.
mean, okay, great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I'm happy to be doing this with you on your first Insta Live then. It's
Yeah.
great.
Okay.
So, Vishwanath, thank you so much for doing this with us. It's a real pleasure for us to host somebody such as yourself. It has been actually, this is one of the talks that I've been really looking forward to because urban planning is a topic that I find really interesting, and water sustainability has been something that Tamara Leisure Experiences particularly has been quite focused on over the last few years. And so this was a really exciting opportunity for me to also be able to kind of pick your brain on this topic a bit. So thank you so much. It's really wonderful. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So just we'll get kick started. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us in continuing the conversations around environmental sustainability, environmental responsibility, with some diverse and innovative climate advocates throughout this week. It's an absolute pleasure for me to be welcoming Vishwanath Srikantaiah. Vishwanath is a trustee of the Biome Environmental Trust and has been instrumental in bringing back to functionality about 10,000 water wells with well diggers, and has been responsible for recharging around 200,000 wells, servicing over 1 million people. So the impact is incredible and enormous. So Vishwanath, I guess just to get kicked off and to get started, if you could tell us a little bit about your journey into urban planning, and then from there into water activism, and then maybe tell us a little bit about the synergies and the connections between urban planning with efficient use and distribution of natural resources such as water.
The personal journey first, and very quickly at that, before I bore everybody to death. I'm a civil engineer by qualification. The moment I finished civil engineering from Mysore University, I joined the School of Planning in Ahmedabad to study what was then the postgraduate diploma in urban and regional planning. So studies led me into the scene of urban and regional planning. So that helped to sort of give me the broad overview of the civil engineering potential as well as the infrastructure issues, and what it could mean to a fast urbanizing urban India. Yeah. So that professional connect with it. As one was looking at these features, for me personally, urban planning comes from a history which is linked very closely to water and sanitation, especially sanitation in the sense in Bangalore, for example, it was the plague which drove urban planning of a certain sense. So the layouts of Malleshwaram and Baswangudi, which were just about developing, also were rationally developed to answer the issue of the plague, right? And so therefore, what should be the norms for building bylaws? What should be the spaces? How should roads be designed? What should be natural ventilation? What should be the cleanliness? How should water be supplied and taken away? All
Right.
sort of informed urban planning in Bangalore. So that was of particular interest to me. And then, of course, I was part of funding these projects in cities through my work at HUDCO. And so it was a natural connect.
To me, it sounds so interesting when you talk about when urban planning as a subject is really interesting to me because so what we do in hotels, for instance, is that typically, we get a piece of land and we have to do our planning within that, right? And it's usually, in our cases, most cases, our projects have been greenfield. So we start with something quite bare, and of course the natural resources exist, but then we create within that space. With urban planning, I would imagine it is so complicated as time goes on because you have all of these sort of underlaying infrastructures which exist. It's not like you can uproot everything and plug something absolutely new because everything is connected and interconnected. And that must be such an interesting challenge. So just going back to the other part of the earlier question that I had, how does it connect when there's a certain amount of natural resources which are sometimes limited? Water, for instance, has been
you'll have to get a bit louder. I'm sorry, I'm not able to hear you very clearly.
Okay.
Maybe it's my...
Do you want to just see if your speaker is working? Can you hear me now?
A little better, but it's not a bit louder.
Okay. I can try taking off my headphone and let me know if this works better. Is this better?
I'm getting old also.
Better?
So yeah, that's a bit better, yeah.
Okay, great. Bye. What I was saying is that, see, in an urban development, right, there's underlying infrastructure which exists, and you have to do your planning around that infrastructure in the sense that you cannot uproot everything which is there in a city or in a section of a city and then replant something which is absolutely new, because it has to be connected to what already exists and within the limitations of the resources which are available in that particular part of the city. So just going back to what I was asking before, and that, the second part of the question that I had was that, how does that connection happen, right? What is the synergy between urban planning and efficient usage or distribution of natural resources? How do they come together?
So if we look at the history of urban planning, again, from a Bangalore perspective, like I said, public health drove the first set of urban planning designs, right? The consequences of that kind of intervention, for example, pipe water supply coming into the city in 1896, meant that the city got delinked from the tanks and lakes because the lakes, tanks, and wells were no longer necessary for water. Why I lead up to this is that the pipe water from Hesarghatta was then transformed into wastewater, which ended up in these tanks and lakes. So these tanks and lakes became polluting sources, right?
Right.
So now, therefore, they had to be either removed, which was what happened because they were no longer necessary for the purpose they were designed, and urban planning then started to fill up these lakes. Following up, malaria came to the cities in the 60s, and malaria then was a big public health impact, and therefore, again, these tanks were questioned, and a lot of tanks were actually recommended to be filled up by the malaria committee, which was set up by the corporation. So planning natural resources and what's happening as a consequence of the infrastructure that we lay has a roll-on effect. It's a sort of a million cuts kind of a thing. Ecology and environment, though they were there in urban planning long back in terms of the garden city principle, but the environment per se became a focus of attention for design around urban planning in the 90s, as late as the late 80s or the 90s. So natural infrastructure was never really a thinking beyond what was ephemerally called a green belt around the city, which was then just sort of colored green on the map, and it was left like that. But beyond that, it was not there. So therefore, the whole model of urban planning has been a transport model. Try to minimize the distance between places of residence and places of work, which were actually distanced because the workplaces as industries were seen as polluting. So therefore, you retreated to your residential areas, which was more clean, and then you commuted to these industrial factories, and then you came back, right? But now the things are changing because mixed land use, service industries developing, industries are no longer polluting the way they were in the manufacturing era. Mm-hmm. So therefore, the notion of urban planning has to accommodate all this. But in all this is the sort of furious pace of population growth and urbanization, which is happening in a few cities in India. Not all small and medium towns are growing, large cities are growing. And the inability of the planned city to catch up with the pace of the city itself. So vast tracts of the city are unplanned. In Mumbai or in Delhi, 50 to 60% of people occupy informal spaces, right? So therefore, what do you do with these informal spaces? How do you make sure that the condition of living is good? Has been a challenge, and I don't think we've ever met up with that challenge at all. So history has played a tremendous role in the notion of planning, and urban infrastructure has also led the way as to how we think about cities.
And how, so from your traditional background, I guess, of urban planning and thinking about resource management, how did you get into activism and sort of being vocal,
So the part of my work, which was with the Housing and Urban Development Corporation, it was a Government of India enterprise where I was working, offered me the opportunity to travel to almost all small and medium towns and almost every alternate village, at least in South India, because we were funding large-scale rural housing programs for the government of Andhra Pradesh, the then unified Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and Goa. Also, that we were funding a series of urban infrastructure projects. And what one could see in the late 80s and 90s already was water supply was becoming a major challenge. We hadn't realized our dependence on groundwater. So here I was visiting settlements and housing colonies developed by the state, which were unoccupied because there was no water. So this was perplexing. Why is there a disjunct between what we do in terms of intervention of housing and what actually happens when people cannot occupy these beautiful houses created? So that led me into an inquiry. And in the meantime, we were dealing with funding urban infrastructure projects on water supply for the first time in India. Post-liberalization, 1991, right? So this was exciting times because I think for the first time we were actually calculating the cost of a project and the cost of water. Before that, the funding was coming from the Life Insurance Corporation and other state planning boards, which never looked at costs of projects, right? But now you have to look at it from an economic term. And this was very revealing to me. So therefore, then I started to pursue the journey as call me an activist. I don't particularly like the term activist, but as an investigator and a researcher from a community and a citizen's perspective. So combine Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar, as Rohini would put it, Rohini Nilikani. So therefore, to take all these three lenses and bring them to bear on the issue, which is water, that's been the journey.
Okay. It's interesting. I never realized that the water scarcity issue was something that was even noticed as you said, in the late 80s and early 90s. It seems like a much more modern issue. So I guess awareness around it was really, maybe it's just my ignorance also. Like it seems like in Bangalore specifically, it's only been something that we've been talking about for maybe the last 10 years or so, in a sense, right? In a more mainstream fashion. It was there, but I feel like in the more mainstream fashion, maybe something that everyone has only come to understand in the last 10 years. So it's interesting to see that journey and that awareness took quite some time, actually. Rainwater harvesting and well restoration. This is something that you have worked in. You've impacted 1 million people through the work that you've done. These are replicable and scalable models for dealing with water scarcity in water-deprived regions. What are the obstacles that you're seeing in delaying the mass implementation of practices?
Yeah. So as times evolve, our thinking about a particular idea evolves, right? So in the 19th century and the 20th century, the notion of water supply to a city was that you had sufficient water far away in dams and rivers. So it was an engineering challenge to bring the water from a far off place, pump it into the city, and there would be an inexhaustible supply of water, and cities could grow with this regional water supply. Come the 21st century, we start to realize that A, there's climate change, but B, there's also a limit to the resource availability at a particular regional scale, right? So then the attention focuses on local waters. And then you try to figure out what is the local water. So of course, the local waters are lakes and streams and rivers, which are there, but also rain that falls on the city. And I think in the 90s, again, we started to do a recalculation of how much rainwater is available in our cities. And it was a staggering number. Just to give you an example, in Bangalore, we pump 1,450 million liters per day from the Kaveri River. But what actually falls on the city is double that. It's equivalent to 3,000 million liters per day, right? And this rainwater is actually being wasted and is causing waterlogging and flooding everywhere. So therefore, many cities are now realizing that there seems to be a disconnect between the local waters, which is becoming a problem, and faraway waters, which are running out. So therefore, the need to do rainwater harvesting. And in India, rainwater harvesting has been particularly used in a sense, not of storage, but of recharge. In the rest of the world, rainwater picked up and pushed into the ground is called aquifer recharge. Whereas in India, we call it rainwater harvesting, right? So there, again, the fact with India is that we are one of the largest users of groundwater in the world. We use 250 cubic kilometers of groundwater nationally, which is more than USA and China combined. That's number 2 and 3 combined don't use as much groundwater as we do. And just as an example, in Bangalore alone, we may have 4 lakh to 5 lakh bore wells. Now, all these bore wells and groundwater withdrawal structures are dependent on rainwater for recharge, right? So therefore, unless we do the connect between the rainwater and these structures which are taking out groundwater, we are in a problem as many bore wells are running dry and as the depths of the bore well water go down to 2,800 feet and 2,000 feet in parts of the city, right? So therefore, then you try to look at what are the potentials of rainwater harvesting, and that's an interesting journey in itself.
But why is it not getting implemented? I mean, there's clearly a
Well, there are 2 reasons for it, why it's not getting implemented. One reason is that if you're already connected to the Bangalore Water Supply and Sewerage Board, you're getting water at 7 rupees a kiloliter. Water is hugely subsidized. Right. It costs the BWSSB 95 rupees a kiloliter to produce 1,000 liters of water. They give it to you and me at 7 rupees a kiloliter, right? So every middle-class household in Bangalore, which consumes 20,000 liters of water, is subsidized to the extent of 1,650 rupees a month. So when you have cheap water and you have just about sufficient water, you get it 2 or 3 times a day, but that's sufficient for your requirement, you actually don't want to put in this huge initial investment that you have to do in rainwater harvesting. Of course, after that, it's free, but rainwater harvesting is to combat subsidized water. Therefore, it doesn't take off. 2, it's a new idea, right? For a long time, we were dependent on pipe water. We were used to it. Open wells were our source of water. We were used to it. Bore wells became a source of water. We were used to it. So harvesting rainwater and putting it to productive use is a new notion or a new idea. Typically has a implementation cycle of about 30 years. If you take solar water heaters and solar energy as a comparison, it took about 35 years for solar water heating to really take off. It's going to give us some time. But in the meantime, things are all not that bad. There are about 180,000 structures to 200,000 structures with rainwater harvesting in Bangalore city, which makes it the second largest uptake, only next to Chennai, from a city perspective, from a Bangalore perspective. So it's not all that bad. We generally tend to be morose about what has not happened rather than what has actually happened, and try to push the envelope with what has happened, learning from it, and then taking it further, right?
No, and from what I understand from memory, I think any new building permit in Bangalore requires you to be doing rainwater harvesting, if I'm not mistaken. Is that true? Is there?
Sorry, I just sort of lost you for a second. It's maybe.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're still a bit faint. Do you think that there's something wrong with what my recipient mobile could be?
Well, possibly. It could either be or it could be just the volume on your device. Is there, or it could be that you're not using the speaker, like it's the output is on the earpiece as opposed to the speaker.
Okay, so let me try and get my earpiece. Give me 10 seconds, please, if it's possible. Yeah. I'm sorry about this.
Everyone, if you have any questions, this is a really interesting conversation. I have 1,000 questions, but if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat, and we will try to get to them at the end of the conversation.
Well, now you're loud and clear, so I don't know what happened, but it's perfectly fine.
Great. Okay, I lost my thought earlier, but no.
We were
Okay,
looking at rainwater harvesting and
yes, yes.
getting.
So what I was no, I believe that now for a building permit, I think particularly you have to have rainwater harvesting in the design. So it's so anything new that's being built has to implement. So I guess that's also a word.
So I got lucky to sit on the committee which drafted the bylaw and the policy. And what we got lucky in Bangalore is that we have something called the Karnataka State Natural Disaster Monitoring Center. This is a fantastic government institution which has set up 99 weather stations all across the city. So every 2 wards has a weather station, which means Bangalore City has granular data at ward level as to what the rainfall pattern is. And it's remarkable that there's a lot of difference between the south of Bangalore and the north of Bangalore and so on and so forth. So we were able to use daily rainfall data to recommend the bylaws, which demands that for every square meter of roof area, you have to create a 60-liter storage or recharge structure. And for every square meter of paved area, you have to create the storage or recharge structure, right? So data generation, institutions which mobilize the data and put it in domain for policies to be impacted, and then to then make it bylaw and persuade citizens to do it. In Bangalore, the choice is still there with the citizens. There's no penalty like in Chennai, but there was a threat of cutting off your water supply if you didn't do it within 6 months. We tend to be more persuasive in our approach. However, there is a fine if you don't do rainwater harvesting, your water bill doubles if you don't do it within the 6-month time. So it's a compact between the state and citizenry where education and communication plays an important role in persuading people to come up on board the ship. But the real gorilla in the room, to use that metaphor, is the water pricing. And if you have a lousy water pricing system, it distorts the market completely.
Right, which is what you're also happening parallel to what is existing in policy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and with water, as you know, just to make that one particular point, water has this characteristic of being a human right. Nobody should be denied water because there's a price to it, right? But then it's an economic good beyond a certain point. So how do you do the balancing act of it being a human right and everybody getting universal access to it, but then recovering the cost so that the institution which supplies it can continue to invest in repairing the infrastructure and pushing the network to the further suburbs to give new connections. That's always a tension in the urban water supply scheme, including the sanitation scheme.
Interesting. Are there any other ways in which you feel that urban planning can either repair or disrupt traditional water supply chains in our city, in Bangalore, or in cities?
For long, we have neglected the aquifers, the groundwater, the area below our soil, which stores water and is capable of releasing it, right? So aquifers have never been a part of the urban planning design. So when we design our metros, for example, or our double basement, triple basement parking in multi-story buildings, in many places we can completely disrupt aquifers, destroy aquifers. We pump out the water and throw it out because it causes flooding for our parking or for our metro stations. And it permanently takes away the space where rainwater could be held and then reused by citizenry. Urban roads and movement networks disrupt hydrology. Surface movement of water is completely disrupted and it causes waterlogging and flooding. Rail networks, road networks, flyovers, all these do a lot of damage to hydrology. It's only now we are understanding the implication of destroying our natural water courses, our wetlands, our water bodies. And now we are starting to understand what we are doing as a damage to our aquifers. So the new era of planning will start to think about aquifers and hydrology and hydrogeology to make sure that water, which is the single most scarcest natural resource, is integrated with it, right? That will be the brave new world.
Interesting. And is that moving into policy? You talk about the disruption of aquifers, the preventative measures that can be taken.
It still has to enter the urban planning policy domain. It's only gradually putting its footsteps there. Still, the dominant narrative is the transport model. So we have a long way to go before we integrate a lot of our natural resources, especially water, into urban planning.
There was actually a question from Manika Sharma, which I thought was kind of connected to what we're talking about. He said, "Sir, you talk about Bangalore being a net producer of water due to return flows. However, the quality of these return flows sent to Kolar and Tumkur becomes a question. How do we look at this?
We are running the second largest program in the world, next only to Mexico City, in picking up what is called wastewater or used water, treating it and shipping it to fill 137 lakes in Kolar, potentially 500 lakes in Kolar, and a lot more lakes in Chikbalapur, 150 lakes, and so on and so forth. About 1,000 lakes will be filled with the treated wastewater from Bangalore. For now, what's happening is that these lakes receive the water and therefore they're recharging the aquifers, and farmers have access to climate change resistant water, drought proof water in these districts. So the farmers are getting a livelihood security from it. In terms of the wastewater itself, filling these tanks, there's an ecological regeneration of bird biodiversity, mammalian biodiversity, reptilian biodiversity, and so on and so forth, right? And in turn, if we do it well, the city gets food security. Because when the farmers grow the vegetables and crops, it comes back to Bangalore, using Bangalore's wastewater in a cycle, which is called the circular economy, right? Now, there are concerns about the quality of the wastewater. For now, the standards which are prescribed in India are being followed in this project by the state, by the Minor Irrigation Department and the Bangalore Water Supply and Sewerage Board. But we have the technologies to improve the treatment further and further. And that is what is necessary. And that investment is happening in Bangalore now to upgrade all the sewage treatment plants. There are 33 sewage treatment plants. There will be 55 sewage treatment plants. All of them will be upgraded to virtually treated to tertiary standards, which means the water is fit to be recharged and then drunk as potable water, right? So in the interregnum, as we learn our lessons, we have to make sure that there's no permanent pollution damage. That is being tracked and monitored, and it's unlikely to be. So therefore, what Bangalore is doing is becoming a water and fertilizer factory. It takes 1,450 million liters from the Kaveri, adds another 600 million liters from groundwater, total is 2,050 million liters, ships that, or 80% of that, to the neighboring dry districts which are climate change affected, and make sure that the farmers' livelihood and agriculture is restored. It's a fantastic experiment. We don't really talk too much about it. We worry too much about the negative impact. We have the technology to fix the problem. We have to have the will and the financial investment to make sure that there's no health risk or environmental risk. And it's a matter of time. I think this is a city which can do it.
So this is an ongoing experiment at the
This is a program running since 2018. Actually, about 400 million liters is already being shipped, and 137 lakes are already full.
So it's suggested as it's viable at this point. It's something which is continuing growing.
This project or program, when it runs, will support the irrigation of 64,000 hectares of otherwise dry farmland. It will help the livelihoods of 64,000 farmers, the average landholding being 1 hectare. So it's a fantastic compact between a city and its hinterland. Cities have been seen as natural usurpers of resources, of natural resources. They take away from the hinterland and deprive the hinterland of water and resources. Here's a turnaround into it, the city becoming a net supplier. It's an experiment which needs to have more focus and more improvement. And in my opinion, it will transform this major Bangalore metropolitan area of 8,840 square kilometers.
Amazing. That's a really positive thing to hear.
In this sector, one day you're down in the depths, and in the other day you're on a high, because there are such nice things that are happening at the same time, such elementary bad things that are happening. So yeah, it's a very nice thing to hear.
So we talked a bit about government and their role in in better resource management. What do you see the roles of organizations and individuals in resource management, and particularly energy and water?
Which organizations?
Any organization, I think in general, right? So corporations, any organization. Because
so that's a fantastic thing that's also happening with, especially a lot of large corporations. They're calculating their energy footprint, their water footprint, their carbon footprint, and all of them are trying to go to zero liquid discharge for water, as they call it, and zero emissions, as they call it, right? So what is the unit at which you can become self-sufficient is an exploration in terms of energy, water. Here's an argument that I put, that if every individual in Bangalore had 40 square meters of roof area or land area, right, he or she could be water sufficient. From that 40 square meter, if she harvests all the rainwater that falls, she would get the equivalent of 100 liters per capita per day. From that 40 square meters, you would get 4 units of energy, which is more than enough for you. So you would get energy security. You would have water security. On that 40 square meter, if you are growing greens on the terrace, let's say garden or balconies, you would be nutrition sufficient. The fourth important thing, which you are talking to other people, the waste that we generate from our toilets, for example, or from the kitchen in terms of biodegradables, all could be absorbed in that 40 square meter. They don't have to go far away from the city making mountains of garbage, right? So it gives us waste security. And fifth, it would give us biodiversity security, because if we grow the right palette of different kinds of plants, it would also be a harbor for insects and butterflies and birds, right? So with 40 square meter, water, energy, food, waste, and biodiversity security. This is at a unit of a small household. You can imagine this happening at apartment scales, at gated community scales, at ward scales, and finally the city scale itself. The technologies are there. The design push is what is needed to make sure that that happens.
Interesting. Okay. So again, it sounds like there are good solutions that are there, which are covered. But implementation has.
So absolutely, it's a new idea. I think we do a lousy job of communicating these new ideas in a fashion which kicks in with the normal populace. I think we're a bit of a bad communicator. For example, the city of Bangalore has the single largest number of modern earth buildings. Earth buildings in which the earth for the construction material comes from the site itself. You design a basement or a cellar, pick the earth, make blocks of it, and build the whole house itself. Then when the building is knocked down at the end of its life cycle, it doesn't create mountains of construction debris. It just goes back to the soil. There are more than 10,000 modern earth homes in Bangalore. It's the single largest in the world. In the world, not India, in the world. And these are all demonstrations of how ecologically we can live and how we can leave a lesser footprint for us and for the coming generations. The big challenge is, how do we scale it up? How do we make it replicable? And how do we get 1,000 more, 1,000,000 more in the journey?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting, right? I mean, it would require a convergence of people. You would need architects, designers, urban planners, as you said, civil engineers, mechanical engineers, like the whole gamut really to come together to make, and marketing really, as you said, this which is popular. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, you see, for example, with the wastewater transfer from the city to the Kolar lakes, it requires specialists in agriculture, specialists in water, in hydrology and in water quality and aquatics, bird biodiversity, specialists in hydrogeology who understand what this recharge into the groundwater, food specialists who know what happens to the wastewater when it gets into the grains and vegetables. Previously, this was seen as only a sanitation engineer's job. Now it's a multidisciplinary job. And the real crack for the solution will come when multidisciplines come together to find perhaps suboptimal solutions in all fields, not one optimal solution in one field, right? And so therefore, how is the dialogue to be commissioned in which all the vocabularies of these different disciplines talk to each other in a meaningful fashion, set visions and goals for ourselves which are achievable holistically, is our challenge of the times.
Yeah.
It is not the technology, it is not the solution, it's the multidisciplinarity of it all. That's the big challenge.
It's interesting because yesterday we had a conversation with Poonam Kasturi, who works at Daily Dump. And, they're in the business of waste management, right? It's social enterprise that works in waste management. And it was a similar thing that we spoke about, which is this idea of collaboration and how that's really the next step to move things forward in leaps and bounds. Because, like you said, even there in waste management, there have been some, simple solutions which have come together, and she actually brought the design element into it as well. And so there are actually, good solutions that individuals can use, organizations can use, but to get it to the next level, you need to have a lot of people coming together to discuss it on a platform, allowing it to spread widely, to be accepted, and to not feel so new anymore, right? In a sense, you keep saying that this is new, but really, I mean, new things do well all the time, but I think it's more than that, right? It's like, how do you convince people that this is sort of the way to be, and this is how it feeds into a larger picture and purpose?
as you put it out, Poonam is an old friend and she's a very good friend and she's a wonderful communicator. Daily Dump, the kind of communication material they put out is absolutely fantastic. Tomorrow you'll be talking to Vani Murthy. She's another fantastic communicator. And these are people with incredible skills and incredible communication skills, right? So, and they also bring, Poonam brings a huge design background to herself. She's from NID, Ahmedabad. And one of the things is what they both Vani will be doing and Poonam does it, and everybody who does it is exude a sense of joy, right? So there's great fun in these solutions, in finding these solutions. It's not a sort of a boring thing, and it's so exciting and interesting. And so therefore, how do we trigger the youngsters to, there are a lot of young people already into this cause and doing things. How do we just get this fun element into cracking problems of our modern times? Is the challenge for us, and it's also happening, but at a pace which could be much faster.
Well, I hope platforms like this conversation itself, you know, I mean, you and I come from very different sectors. You know, being able to have these conversations and being able to have an audience which is sort of diverse. Hopefully, things like this happen more often, right? And we can have more exposure to these issues and solutions. I mean, I love the way that you're talking about solutions. I think it's a really exciting way to put things out there because, like you said, that's not really the issue, and oftentimes it's quite interesting.
You're absolutely right. In the sense, one of the things we have to keep a look on is the nature of how we approach a solution. Like if you pick rainwater harvesting, for example, rainwater harvesting is for the rich. The pipe water network is for the poor. Poor people don't have large roofs, they don't have the high quality of roofs, and therefore they cannot be self-sufficient for it. We should realize it. What's happening now is that the rich are getting connected to the pipe network and drawing the subsidies. The poor have to bear the brunt of private water tankers and bad quality water, right? So as we do what we do as solutions, we should keep the equity perspective and the universality perspective, right? Some water for all, some access for all, not distributed in an inequitous sense. So do the stuff that you need to do, but make sure that the people involved in the solution space, like the work that we do with the million wells, it's a solution for the water problem of the city, but it involves the livelihoods of well diggers. And if the well diggers become part of the solution, their children get an education and better access to health. Whereas if the same money is invested in a large dam, then the money flow is totally different. So when you have a choice between the natures of solutions, pick the one which brings social justice, equity, and livelihoods.
I think that's a wonderful message, especially for corporations, because I think it's a good philosophy to be guided by when you're picking, for instance, what CSR initiative in water sustainability you want to pursue. Look at the ones which are bringing, the one that's bringing equity. And there's a sense of fairness in it, and that to me that connects very deeply. I think that makes a lot of sense.
This is J.C. Kumarappa talking from Gandhiji's time. He's the hero. Reread Kumarappa. If there's one message that I have for youngsters who are listening is, go to the economist J.C. Kumarappa, read him, and you will be enlightened.
Thank you. Climate change, moving on, climate change, which is, an absolute global issue, and something that we are seeing on a daily basis affecting us nowadays, on a personal level. I think every person, especially those of us in cities, we feel the impact of it on a daily basis. And farmers feel it much, much more than we do. There's clearly an impact of, what's happening in climate change on the resources that we have in any given region. What are your specific areas of concern? Are there any very large looming areas of concern for you when it comes to that? And have you seen any viable solutions beyond what you've already?
So here's the thing with climate change. The Titanic has hit the iceberg, in my opinion. And now we have to choose the color of paint which we want to apply on the deck chairs, right? So the music has started playing, the ship has. So a vast majority of people in our country are the receivers of climate change, which they have not caused, right? They have not been responsible for the historic carbon emissions, or they are not still responsible for the carbon emissions, but they have to bear the brunt of the impact of climate change. Therefore, whenever we intervene in a solution, we have to now think about adaptation strategies to climate change first, right? In whatever investment we make, that should be our first target. Mitigation is for the huge consumers. Mitigation is not the responsibility of the poorer sections of society. So focus on adaptation in every sector. And two examples, which again, at the risk of repeating, if you understand that climate change in the city of Bangalore makes for higher intensity of rainfall, short spells, but large bursts of rainfall, you would have to deal with your city for that rainfall pattern and make sure that your city is able to adapt to this frequency of and intensity of the monsoon, right? Which you can do through the rainwater harvesting bylaw and by giving jobs to the well diggers and 1 million wells, every home picking rainwater, making sure it goes into the aquifer, not flooding our waterways or stormwater drain or roads is one way of looking at a solution, right? Then it will give us supplementary water with the water which may run out to us. So create and think about opportunities through the impact of climate change. High rainfall, high intensity rainfall, deal with it. Wastewater. The paradigm had been, let's treat wastewater and let's reuse it up in industries. No, let's push it into agriculture so that the livelihoods of the farmers are protected from the vagaries of the monsoon. At least water security is ensured. In a strange way, even fertilizer security is ensured because this wastewater has nutrients in it and the farmers actually don't need too much of artificial fertilizers, which has a high carbon emission, right? So at every time of intervention which we do in our sector, make sure that you're making it more resilient, the solution more resilient, and being able to cope with what you would find as the vagaries of the weather thanks to climate change.
And it sounds like a lot of the solutions which are coming up are based on this idea of the circular economy and sort of ensuring that resources are used, recycled through it. Because as you said, wastewater goes into the soil, it becomes more fertile, it produces good food, which then feeds back the populations in the city. So I think,
right.
And even the water recharge, the economy of, drawing less from the rivers, or just ensuring that there's, not causing further damage by having tankers, and having that air pollution as a result of the tankers, for instance, and that, through that. It sounds like, it's I think the circular economy is something that I think more and more we're seeing the use of how that can be, the solutions are being created from that.
So the circular economy has two connotations in the way it has been constructed. One is with the physical flow of materials, right? That's the first connotation of it. The second connotation is with the economy of it, right? In terms of the money there is. Right. In the Indian context, the circular economy will have to also encompass the social circular economy. We will have to look at livelihoods. This is an era of huge underemployment and unemployment also, right? So we'll have to think very carefully through the circular economy principles from the Indian perspective. And in India, when I say India, there's also millions of India, right? But from each geographical and local context, think of the social component of it. If your physical circular economy flows also add to livelihoods and labor and wages, that's the better solution. You may take the water and treat it at your own industry level and push it back into your boiler. But suppose it goes into a lake and allows the fish to proliferate and the pelicans and the painted starts to come. Then it recharges into the ground. Then you draw it as groundwater. Then you use it in your factory. In the intermediate phase, you have fostered ecology. In the same way, if you fill the tanks of Kolar, you're giving a livelihood to agriculture, but then you're able to draw the groundwater for the factories in Kolar in the industrial areas there. So think of the extra step which will cause social good with the circular economic principles. The only difference that I think that we need to think through in the Indian context.
That connects very, very well with, I think, what we think about at Tamara Leisure Experiences, because, hospitality similarly is an industry. It's where we don't, a lot of the people who come into our industry are the first in their families to come into the organized sector, for instance. And, the industry itself has a huge demand, which is there. And at the same time, you have underemployment in our country. We have an organization called Satya, which is part of our nonprofit side, which is actually trying to bridge these two. So it sounds, it makes a lot of sense to us. And personally, one of my driving factors, probably my most driving factor in working in hospitality, is our ability to create jobs and having that sort of social good that you're able to do by supporting families across the country. We are such a large, we have that sort of breadth.
Yeah, so what you say is so absolutely right. So therefore, I just have to put in that one word: local jobs for local people with upgradation of skills, but with dignity, right?
Absolutely.
A farmer who's lost his land and then comes in as a worker should not be treated as somebody who needs upgradation, but be treated with respect and dignity. Then he or she brings so much local knowledge there, right? So therefore, the hospitality industry has this great opportunity of communication. The consumers of your hospitality need not moral preaching, but nudges in which they alter their behavior to understand the crisis of our times, and therefore to be therefore respectful and compatible with what we need to do. That's a very tough challenge in the hospitality industry. If I come to a Chikmagalur, I don't come there to be given moral lessons on how to live and how to engage with the community. I come to enjoy. But how can I then be layered with these messages, which makes my life more fulfilling, my mind more fulfilling, especially that of the children who come there, and I leave a better person than when I came to your place, right?
Absolutely.
More relaxed person, but also a more informed and a more educated person. It's a huge challenge for you guys, but my sympathies with you. But
no, but we're up for the challenge, and I think it's something that we really are passionate about, because as you said, I think dignity in work is something which is really, really important, and we need to see more of that in not just hospitality, but across industries in India, because everyone, especially those of us who are working in service, we deserve the dignity, honestly. We do, and we're doing a phenomenal job, all of us, right? I'm saying, from the well diggers to the people who work in any sort of work to hospitality. And, when we talk about hospitality, it starts with, the chaiwala to, the chatwala to everybody, right? And there needs to be a dignity in that employment. And only then that respect, will we see more people wanting to have these jobs and taking interest in creating these jobs and feel a purpose in the work that they do. So those well diggers, for instance, the fact that they're part of the story of a million wells, I mean, that's something that we always hope that they feel pride in that, and that they see that there is a sort of large, but it is a difficult one for them to feel and for others to recognize as well. And I think similarly in hospitality, that's also often the case. Where it just culturally, socially, it hasn't, that bridge hasn't been bridged. But as you say, it's something to work on, and for hopefully that we do. In Tamara, we hire mostly local, and the idea being that they bring the cultural nuances with them. So I invite you to visit one of our properties so you can see for yourself, and of course educate us on what more we can do, because I think with any sort of work, there's always room for improvement and room for different perspectives. Please do come. I have
for sure.
And then I'll see if there are some questions from those who have joined us. I have one or two otherwise as well. In recent times, used or wastewater has proven to be a climate resilient resource, and we've spoken about this. In industries, such as hospitality, such as textiles, such as farming, do you see that we can leverage this in a larger way? I think we've spoken a bit about farming. Maybe in other industries, such as manufacturing and something like is that more ways in which we leverage this wastewater.
So absolutely, there are creative ways in using used water. It's no longer called wastewater because the terminology gives the notion of waste. So they call it used water in our circles, and new water in Singapore, as it is called. There are enormous potentials for partnerships with the used water, right? For example, there's one hospitality hotel in Bangalore, which the used water is used for the golf course adjoining it, right? There have been woodlots which have been fed by used water, woodlots for energy, and which has provided employment to those who take care of the woodlots for forestry and nursery. There have been lakes which have been revived with used water, wetlands which have been restored with used water, and the wetlands not only treat the used water further, but also allow biodiversity to flourish. There are many imaginations with used water. It's also dependent on the context, but be prepared to engage beyond your boundaries with used water. Don't think of used water for yourself and what you can do to fix the problem. See, together with the community, can you fix it as a community problem? If that approach is taken, I think many solutions can emerge.
And that would be more sustainable as well, right? Sense of sustainable over time. Because I think when the burden is on a single space, right, whether individual or organization, it becomes difficult to keep after some time. So if you have the community, it becomes a much more long-living idea.
Yeah, absolutely. The great challenge of our times also is the separation of the city life from soil. Soil is under tremendous threat and crisis globally and in India also. But this disconnect means that the resources are now have to flow from far and come to our place of consumption. And then again, it has to travel very far to reach the absorption place. And soil is the great assimilator, great absorber. Soil, if used productively, carefully, and nurtured with less chemicals, of course, obviously. So therefore, the compact that we need with the used water is with soil and earth. Mm-hmm. And somehow we have to bring the earth back into our cities. We have to get nature back into our cities and earth back into our cities, which then will allow these compacts by various industries and service providers with water and wastewater.
In fact, so in Trivandrum, we have a hotel, Obai Tamara, and that hotel is certified by Griha, which is a building certification standard, which, when the thing with the Griha and with, I think most of these, standards is that you have to start working on them from the time of design. So we started working on it several years ago. At the time when you start, your first thing you do is remove the topsoil and you preserve it and you keep it because it's so rich and it's so important. So we kept it aside, of course, and we stored it. And then once, the building is up, you put it back. And in fact, in that property, what we do with our used water is we use it for any sort of landscaping, which is, a phenomenal way to do it. And then, of course, you're sort of continuously refreshing the topsoil itself and whatever soil you have there. And the other thing we do is we use it to flush the toilets because, so we plug it back into our own sanitation system. And it's been, it's a phenomenal thing, especially this hotel is in Kerala where, water is abundance. And so it's an incredibly useful way for us to ensure that there is this circulation of water and that we're using it, over again, because dumping it would be a tremendous, problem, just given that there is so much water in this community to start with, and it's in a coastal region also, right? So it's, I think that's one of the simplest things that any new building can do. Vishwanath? Okay, I think we lost him. Hopefully we'll get him back in a few seconds. I hope everyone if there's any other questions, please do put it in to the chat as we're just about to close up. There we go. We're back. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry.
No problem. So, okay, I have one last question that I got from, somebody who's watching, and then, we're just about done. So the last question is, as individuals, how can we contribute to raising awareness, making donations, or volunteering? We lost him again, unfortunately. Yeah. So the question is around raising awareness and how can we as individuals, either support through making donations or volunteer or otherwise.
Yeah, great. I mean, this is the era of social media, so raising awareness, communications. Happy. Just get onto our website, biometrust.org. There are ways. We're completely more or less volunteer driven. A lot of volunteers come in and pitch in with ideas and work with it. So the website is a good place to get there, the connect, biometrust.org.
Okay. That's great. Thank you so much. So I think, I think that's it. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Like I said, this was, for me, I was able to kind of understand so much more about the space and what's been going on in this space. And it's given me a few ideas also on how, us as an organization is able to sort of contribute more and support water sustainability more. So thank you for that. And hopefully others who are on this call have also been inspired by the same. So thank you so much. All right, everyone, thank you for your questions. Thank you for participating. This is our last Insta Live for the week. Thank you for joining us, throughout this time. Tomorrow on World Environment Day, we'll be holding our final dialogue in the form of a webinar, and you can register for that webinar in a link which is in our bio. So please tune in for that. Also, the speakers tomorrow are phenomenal. They are two great people. One is Manoj Kumar, who is a serial social entrepreneur and co-founder of Araku Coffee. And the other is Vani Murthy, who is a TEDx speaker and a composting enthusiast. She is somebody who, as Vishwanath put, brings a lot of fun to her work. Together, Vani and Manoj will be discussing micro and scalable ways of living well with nature. So thanks again for joining us. It's been a really great conversation, and hopefully we can continue discussing more around responsibility towards our environment tomorrow in the dialogue on the webinar tomorrow. Thanks, everyone. Bye.